Thank you for joining us today. My name is Danielle, and I am one of your Solid State Circuit Society staff members. The topic of today's webinar is Understanding Work Culture and its Importance to Succeed. Today's webinar will be a little over an hour. We will hold a Q&A session after the webinar. Attendees of this webinar have the opportunity to earn a certificate of participation for attending this webinar. I will put the link in the chat box with instructions on how to obtain the certificate. The webinar video and slides will be posted on the SSCS YouTube channel after the webinar. Please use the Q&A section on your dashboard to ask any questions. I now invite Divya Akella to give a few welcoming remarks.
Hello and welcome. I am Divya Akella. I'm a computer architect at Mythic, based in Austin, Texas, and an IEEE SSCS Young Professionals Committee member. So I'll be the moderator of this webinar. Before we kick off the panel discussion, I will start with a short introduction of who we are and what we do. As young professionals and students, you make up more than 30% of our overall membership, and you are the future of IEEE SSCS. As a Young Professionals Committee, we strive to address the different needs and interests of our younger members with initiatives like this webinar series. Selected benefits of SSCS membership for young professional members include the following: access to the SSCS Resource Center, which contains technical tutorials, short courses, webinars, distinguished lectures in your local setting, opportunities to apply for various grants and awards, develop leadership skills, and make professional connections by becoming a local or global young professionals leader. Online mentoring platform, it helps you connect with mentors around the world virtually. SSCS Young Professional networking events at different conferences like ISSCC, CICC, VLSI, ESERC, ASCCC. I just wanted to also take a moment to quickly highlight a recent mentoring event that was organized by SSCS YP, Women in Circuits, and EDS at the VLSI 2022 symposium in June. It was a great success with over 80 attendees. I also wanted to remind you all to save the date for an upcoming mentoring event at ESERC on September 20th. So we have also hosted webinars for Young Excellence, which is a quarterly webinar series dedicated but not limited to young professional members. This webinar series complements the technical webinars, which focus on technical developments. A list of webinars we did in the past is shown here, and these are all available at the SSCS YouTube channel. Without further ado, today, as part of the webinar series, we bring you the panel discussion, Understanding Work Culture and its Importance to Succeed. So as a young professional or a future employee, you might wonder what work culture exactly means, a term that you hear so often. And let's say you're just getting started in industry or academia and familiarizing yourself with and getting used to what is known as the company work culture. So work culture is deemed quite powerful, plays a significant role in the success of an individual as well as the larger team. So it's very important to understand how a healthy or toxic work culture looks like, how can one contribute to a healthy work culture, and what you can do to adapt to it. So in this webinar, we invite 3 senior professionals who worked in multiple organizations around the globe. They will share their personal journeys of working in different environments and how they adapted to different cultures. Through this webinar, you will learn about work culture, how best to use and adapt it for success. So I will start with a quick intro about our 3 wonderful panelists. The first panelist is Dr. Alice Wang, a technical fellow and platform architect at Everactive, working on a platform that enables battery sensing for industrial IoT applications. Previously, she spent several years at Texas Instruments, and before that, as an assistant general manager at MediaTek, working on high-performance processor technology. She's a senior member of IEEE and an advisor for the SSCS Women in Circuits Committee, Welcome, Alice.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is Dr. Carolina Mora Lopez. She's currently the principal scientist and team leader of the Circuits and Systems for Neural Interfaces team at IMEC, which develops circuits and technologies for electrophysiology, neuroprosthetics, and BMI. Previously, she was a researcher and analog designer focused on interfaces for neural sensing applications. Dr. Mora Lopez is a senior IEEE member and serves on the technical program committee of many conferences. Welcome, Carolina.
Thank you.
And our final panelist is Professor Vivek Subramanian. He's a professor of electrical and microengineering at EPFL, Switzerland. He's also the associate director of the IEM and the scientific director of the Micromanufacturing Science and Engineering Research Center. Previously, he was a professor of electrical and computer sciences at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Subramanian also co-founded Matrix Semiconductors in 1998 and LOSIX in 2014. He has received many awards, including the NSF Career Award, multiple Best Paper Awards, and an Outstanding Teaching Award from UC Berkeley as well. Welcome, Vivek.
Thank you.
So thank you all for being here today. To begin with, each of the panelists will share their perspectives about work culture. The second part of the webinar will be a moderated Q&A by me. And the final part will be an audience Q&A moderated by Dr. Ji-Yuan Tang from Peking University. So let's get started. Let's get started with Alice. What are your thoughts on work culture?
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I really love to talk about this topic because I think getting an engineering education is something that we don't learn anything about. So after you get thrust into the workplace, then like you start to learn that work culture is actually really important to understand and to learn about. So I wanted to give, like, I think Divya already talked about my bio, but I wanted to show that I've had experience working for large corporations like Texas Instruments, mainly on the technical ladder. So not being a manager there, but going up in terms of technical leadership. And then at MediaTek, I spent time on the management ladder, so managing as a director and then as the assistant general manager, and even spent time in Asia. I did an expat in Taiwan for 4 years, so got to see some different cultures across the world there. And then finally, currently I'm at a startup because I wanted to experience, like I was in large corporations, wanted to experience something small. And there I've been on the executive team, but also recently back to individual contributor, so back to technical leadership, and I'm a fellow at the IoT startup. So what I wanted to talk about today was, some of the resources that really helped me to understand culture at all these different parts of my career and share some interesting stories that came out from that. Okay, so I think I really only understood the definition of defining culture at Everactive, which is the startup that I'm at. And there they have very strong core values. And the resource that this is taken from is a book called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. And the idea is that, the company's core values are those that are really deeply ingrained principles, and they dictate everything the company does. And sometimes you may not even know what your core values are if you haven't thought about it, but they're there. And they're different from baseline or permission to play values, like integrity should be a baseline value, for example. But your core values are really specific to you and your company and your team. They're also not aspirational values, which are more like futuristic values. So for example, when I came to Everactive, one of the baseline values was diversity. However, when I was looking at the hiring practices, who's getting hired, I pointed out like, oh, I don't think diversity is the baseline because we're not really even taking that into account. And so then the team moved that from a baseline value to an aspirational value. It wasn't even really a core value because we weren't actually implementing it. But then when identifying as aspirational, then we put into practices more diversity metrics and practices in our hiring in order to make it more like and eventually became a core value for the company. So, and it wasn't until this last company that I was interviewing with, I decided during the interview process to really find out what is the culture, what is the team's core values. So I really encourage you to do that during the interview process. When I interview people to join my team, as well as when I interview companies, I really want to see like what would it be like to work there, like what would my day-to-day look like, and get a sense of that during the interview process. And what I found in my previous companies, that a lot of them had values. You'd see them on the walls, but they're not what the people would live or die by them. So during the interview process, you may ask, what's the culture? What is the team's core values? And if they don't come up with a really good answer right away, you might want to ask, okay, what's the manager's core values? Because if they're not come to mind, they're definitely there, but you may have to dig around. And it's ideal to find a company whose core values best resonate with your own core values. Next slide. This was an article from HBR about managing across cultures, which I wish I had read before I had gone on an expat to Taiwan for 4 years. And I think it would have really alleviated a lot of my confusion and frustration before I went there. So, I grew up in the United States, went to school, and then worked in the Texas Instruments. So was really used to U.S. culture, work culture, which tends to be more tops down and egalitarian. So the way to look at this chart is that there's different decision-making process across culture and different, structure. And so in the US, it's very tops down and egalitarian. So, tops down is the big boss says we do this, we all, we may disagree, but we commit and we all go in that way. So that's very tops down culture. And egalitarian is, like, hey, to see the CEO, hey Joe, call them by their first name. It's, that's, we're all, equal, we're all people. So that's a very US culture. And so when I went to Asia, and I think Taiwan is closest to Japan, so I put it in that culture, in that quadrant. I didn't, I came in with my US culture. And for example, Taiwan's very hierarchical. So me being a director, I'd go and talk to the engineers because I want to, get the data as quick as possible. So go directly. But the shock on their faces seeing the director coming to them was, I like, oh, okay, they were pretty shocked. And some of the managers who worked for me really didn't like my style, because they're used to, the director talks to them, they talk to their, it's very hierarchical. And then also in terms of consensus, they'd see huge meetings with all the general managers trying to come together to make decisions, and not making decision until everyone is on board. That was a very different style for me. And so I think if I had understood that before I went there, I probably would have been less confused and frustrated. But at the same time, I want to encourage you that, and for me, still wanted to bring my own culture to every situation. So it's not that you want to learn the culture and then assimilate yourself so much as like still bringing your own experiences. Because I think the reason why I went there, they brought me to Asia, was to bring my own culture and to help see everyone can see something different. So yeah, don't forget your own culture, your own style, but understanding the environment is very important. Okay, next slide. And finally, so let's say you're like, oh no, I'm already working and I think my company has a toxic culture. So this podcast I was listening to a couple of weeks ago, The 4 Deadly Sins of Work Culture, I thought was really helpful. It's a podcast by Adam Grant. And I think defining like what exactly is behind the toxicity would be really helpful in order for you to go ahead and do what you can to improve your environment. So this table just shows 4 different quadrants about a toxic work culture. In the top 2, in one case, toxicity it's results above relationships. So and that's probably the most obvious toxic work culture, just a lot of backstabbing, abuse, and people are treated with disrespect. And then people who do that get promoted. That can be very demoralizing. But there's a different side, which is, sometimes the company prioritizes relationships above results, and it's like too nice. And I've definitely been in those situations, and they worry about getting along, so there's no accountability, and then the company results suffer. There's two other quadrants, which is in one case, all rules, no risks. So a lot of red tape everywhere, so much process. And you hear things like, oh, that's the way it's always been done, So that is a bureaucratic environment. And then on the other end, it's just all risks, no rules. It's just like all change all the time, lots of chaos and no process or strategy. So I think understanding these 4 different quadrants can help you to just be a little bit more like conscious about how to change. So if you need more process or maybe less process or versus or more relationships. But I think it's to have a nice healthy balance between these 4 things. And I just want to encourage you, even if the environment has a lot of politics, very toxic, you can always start with what is in your domain. And even if you're an individual contributor and a technical leadership, you are in charge of the environment around you and manage the culture around you. And you'll find that people don't like toxicity, really. It's unhealthy, and they will be attracted to it. And you may feel overwhelmed, like, I'm not the CEO, I can't control the culture, but you really do have a lot of agency in what's around you, what do you own, and being able to make a good environment for yourself. Okay, that's all I had.
Thank you so much, Alice. That was a wonderful presentation, and I'm sure these resources are going to be very helpful to all of us. Thank you. Okay, let's go to our next panelist. Carolina, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you. So I would like to briefly discuss a little bit about my journey. So I think it's different from Alice. I think my journey has been a lot. Part of it in more my studies, my academic work. And I want to share a bit of what I have learned and what are the things that I value the most from all this knowledge and things that I have experienced. So I'm from Colombia. I moved out from Colombia when I finished my bachelor studies, and I moved to Spain to do graduate studies. And I spent there around 4 years, and then I moved to Belgium where I did my PhD, and finally I ended up in the institution I'm now, that is IMEC, where I have had history of being indeed a combination of individual contributor as a researcher, and I have also been a manager, and I'm a manager also combining a bit with technical activities. So I try to do both at the moment. So during this journey, indeed, first there was some cultural differences with Spain, even when language is the same, that already helps. But there are a lot of things different, and yeah, much more different than when you move to a country like Belgium, where also the language add a lot of cultural difference, but a part of the language also a lot of social differences as well. So if you move to next slide, there are many things that I have valued during this journey. First, for example, encountering this open-mindedness that I didn't have when I was living in Colombia. I think that has changed a bit, but I would say that those things were much stronger in Europe, where you could see or nobody cares about what you wear or how you act. There's much more as this sense of social freedom everywhere, and that was quite nice to see. Also the fact that there were no social classes, so this is very funny. In Colombia, people are divided by social classes depending on how much money you make. it's with a good intention. So it's to really people with lower salaries get to pay less for services, universities. But unfortunately, that also get used as a way of discrimination for jobs and for other things. So it has two sides. The part of diversity, I cannot say diversity is perfect yet in Europe, but it was much more um, developed than in Colombia, and that's nice to see diversity in all aspects of it. The work-life balance is actually a very strong European value. People here really value that you have a separation between job and your family, and spending family time is very important. Also more, the last items are more related to Belgium, the calmness of the people. I really resonate with that, the respect. Job stability, for example, in Belgium is much more common to have permanent contracts and less informal jobs than in Colombia. That also makes a difference in how you choose an organization to work. Social security and healthy lifestyle is also something very important in European countries. Of course, that comes at the cost of taxes is also something I will mention later, but it's very good to, it gives a sense of easiness also in your entire life. The part of innovation that relates a bit with the organization I am, that's very nice. Thing to target as an organization, and flexibility and trust. And I will maybe talk a little bit more about this item later. So if you move to next slide, all these things that I mentioned are actually very positive, things that I really value that I didn't see much before when I was living in Colombia. And although those are cultural values in general, actually they reflect a lot in your job. So when you go to an organization in a country where everyone expects those things to be there, of course the company also have those. So there is a direct relationship also between the society and the company. So when I moved to different countries, many of the items that I really value are also sometimes a disadvantage. For example, the work-life balance is taken so strictly that you cannot find shops open in Belgium on Sundays, or all the shops close at 6 p.m. during weekdays. That completely destroyed the way you live and work. So basically, you cannot go out of work and hope to find some groceries. So everything needs to happen on Saturdays. Saturday is such a stressful day for everyone, and everything is full. Also respect to social freedom, also very good, but was also a shock for me. For example, in Colombia is a very stupid value that you need to change clothes every day or wear different clothes. And then in countries like Belgium, you can see someone wearing the same clothes 3 days. And for me, like at the beginning, it's like, oh, that's funny. But then you realize, yeah, of course, this is not a tropical country. So why would you need to do that? So yeah, finding those funny differences is also important. Also, the third one is a very funny. So when I arrived to Belgium, I realized that the way you celebrate your birthday is that you bring your own cake to work, or if you invite people for drinks, you are the one paying. But for me, that was unthinkable. In Colombia, is the other way around. Your colleagues maybe will bring you a cake or invite you for a drink. Belgians are obsessed with weather, and they check the weather forecast all the time. So I do that also. They love sun, which is for me, as Colombian, actually, we don't like sun that much. So those things are also funny to see. The quietness and respect, I love that, but it was a shock. I was used to have a lot of noise. Your neighbors will never care about you, and they can play music all the night long, and nobody will be able to complain. Taxes, that's also a big shock in countries like Belgium, but of course that brings a lot of benefits to society. So yeah, fully supportive of that. Yeah, the fact you need appointments or everything, even to see your parents, people do appointments, so nobody can arrive like without giving a call before. And when I say before, it can be 1 week before, 2 weeks before, so you need to plan. And that also gets reflected to work. So forget about having a very, out of the blue meeting. You always need to count that people have their agendas fully booked for the next couple of weeks. And yeah, the last one, locals are very reserved, but I am too. So it was a nice one to see. And okay, maybe if you move to last slide, just to finalize. Just coming to the serious part, work culture. So of all these things I mentioned, actually I find 5 items very important in work culture. And again, as Alice says, many of these things are really something that we have a say and we have a power to change. The first one is the trust and empowerment. In this, I mean no micromanagement and freedom to choose how you execute your job. I think this is very important for people to feel confident, to feel that what they know what their topic and what they do. Also, the flexibility and freedom. Here you have to choose, for example, to choose your own start and finish times. And I know this doesn't apply to all jobs because there are jobs where you need to have a fixed time. But when it's possible, I think that's a great possibility to give to people in a company. Home working now with COVID, that's quite nice to see that has been finally well implemented almost everywhere. And having full control over your vacations days. I know this doesn't apply to many countries, but it's something I really value in Belgium. But also items I just discussed can only work if you also put something from yourself that is the part of reliability and accountability. So nobody can trust you or give you a lot of flexibility if people cannot rely on you, right? So you need to be able to recognize on mistakes. Once those mistakes happen, take initiative to solve them and contribute to the teamwork. The respect and diversity, I think now this is a very hot topic, I think everywhere, diversity. That comes to the equality and fairness also in hiring, in how people get promoted, in how people get treated in a company. And also being aware of our biases. So we all come with a cultural package, let's say, and we need to be aware of these biases that we have because we all have them. And the personal development opportunities to grow. I think everyone enjoys getting new challenges, getting training, learning, and also sometimes we need to be able to get out of our comfort zone. That's the only way to grow sometimes. So yeah, this summarizes then what I consider important in work culture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolina. You painted a wonderful picture. I felt like I was taking a trip through these different countries. Thank you. So, okay, let's go to our next panelist. Vivek, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Would you advance a few slides, please? Yes, thank you. So what I'm going to do, so I'm obviously, I've been in academia for the vast majority of my career. So what I thought I would do was I would focus on academia-specific topics. And the reason I thought I would do this, firstly, you've heard from someone from industry and you've heard from someone from a research organization. So I don't want to cover the same topics. And what I thought I would do is I'd pick on 2 characteristics that are particularly strong in academia that are different from other places. And they're the following. Firstly, let's recognize that in academia, we are a collection of individual labs and research groups. And in many cases, the culture from one lab is so different from the culture from the lab next door that you cannot draw a unifying team to say, well, universities in the US are this way and universities in Europe are this way. There's a lot more differences just across the same floor of a building because it's so dependent on an individual lab. So I'll try to pick some commonalities there that represent academia. But there are certain characteristics that I think are important in academia. First, there's a huge amount of turnover. in academia, necessarily. The average person in an academic institution, other than the professors who are there forever, is there for 5 years, max. So there's constant turnover. Now that's good and bad because it's bringing in new ideas and new visions, but it also means, you can see culture changing, and if you like a certain culture, yeah, the professor in particular has to take a lot of responsibility to maintain that culture. And then the second thing that I think is different about or unique about academia is, in many cases, a huge percentage of the employees, so to speak, this is their first opportunity to be in a group environment, because most of them this is the first time they're quasi-independent. I mean, certainly I try to treat my students as fully independent. That means this is the first time they have to work with their colleagues. They're not being told exactly what to do. And so it does bias the systems a little bit. So that's the broad overview. I'm going to give you a couple of vignettes. But given this diversity, I think it doesn't make sense for me to try to sort of give my overall theme. I thought I'd pick a couple of vignettes to describe things. So could we move to the next slide, please? So I'll begin by telling you about my personal journey, just so you understand these vignettes that I'm placing before you. First, I spent 20 years as a professor at Berkeley. So I was there till 3 years ago. So the majority of my personal development was certainly at Berkeley. Move forward, please. While I was at Berkeley, I had a really gratifying opportunity. I ran what was called the World Class University Center, which was funded by the Korean government. And so I spent a huge amount of time in Korea. Effectively, over the course of 5 years, I spent more than 1 year in Korea. And that was interesting professionally, but it was also really good for my personal development because it gave me a chance to learn how universities do things differently in a different place. And then about 3 years ago, let's move forward, please, I moved to EPFL. So I've been at EPFL now for a little over 3 years. And this has been a fantastic opportunity for me to reinvent myself and work on different things. But again, it's been an opportunity to see how academia is different in different places and also what's common. So let's move forward, please. Okay, so the first vignette that I'm going to pick on is about how the culture of research. And of course, we as researchers, a lot of us are researchers, we recognize that research is about constantly asking questions, and we have to ask ourselves questions so that we can intellectually develop. We have to ask our colleagues questions so that we can collaborate. And then to make sure we do good science, I mean, this is the basis of peer review, for example, we have to ask questions of our competitors. And I'm putting competitors in quotes because it means, in some cases we're competing, but we're also sort of judging each other, right? I mean, that's what peer review is about. But the goal is all of this has to be constructive, right? None of this is intended to cause problems. It's to be constructive. And one of the things that I think I've noticed is that geography-specific and organizational-specific culture really does influence how we ask questions. So Carolina already talked about work-life balance. I'll come back to that in a minute. But one of the things, when we're asking questions is the geography really seems to affect acceptability of failure, for example. In the US, it was considered not a problem to fail. I mean, most professors, for example, and numerous graduate students spend time at startups. Startups fail. Okay, it's fine. That's how you learn. You learn from failure. Moving to Switzerland, I found that the acceptance of failure is much lower. That's definitely true. And so then when you're asking yourself questions about topics, that, the certainty that you need to have before you move on or you accept your opinion on a given topic, the threshold changes quite a bit. Similarly for colleagues, openness to challenges is related to acceptability of failure, and the thirst for collaboration varies quite a bit. I found because in the US failure is much more acceptable, it was very easy to collaborate. And people look for collaboration because you could challenge yourself, and I really enjoyed that. I think when you're sort of more risk averse, you find a place where you're comfortable, and maybe that limits the amount of collaboration that you do. Now, that can be good and bad. You find this place where you can excel, but I think you also then have to constantly strive to expand your horizons. And then, again, finally, obviously, with competitors, I've already addressed this, you have to sort of think about how to be productive in discussions. Okay, let's move forward, please. So this is an interesting one that I found really interesting, really driven by my move from the US to Switzerland. So, and Carolina sort of addressed this a little bit. What's remarkable about Switzerland to me that's very different from the US is the following. So if I looked at my friends in the US, a huge fraction of my friends were people I met through work. I suspect that's true for most of you who are in the US or have been in the US. A huge fraction of your friends you meet through work, you meet through graduate school. That's pretty typical. And socializing is a big part of work life in the US. I'll come to how it is in Switzerland. It's very different in Switzerland. Now, the consequence of that, the socializing, I apologize, this tends to be quite casual. It should be, we tend to be much more casual, therefore, in the US because socializing is a big part of work. Now, that can be good because since people are so comfortable with each other, it's easy to bridge divides and discuss difficult topics. But I would argue it can also be bad, right? I mean, my grad students and even I, as a professor at Berkeley, I spent a huge amount of hours at Berkeley. But if I took the actual fraction of time that I was being super productive versus the time I was mixing it with socializing or drinking coffee, I could have probably been more efficient. And that's certainly true for my students. So I think we have to acknowledge that there's good and bad to both sides. Now, South Korea was interesting for me. I was surprised when I got there that socializing is also a huge part of the work culture in South Korea, but it doesn't seem to cross hierarchical boundaries as easily. So, for example, I had this large team of graduate students and fellow professors who I worked with, and we used to go out and eat and drink together regularly, but it was a scheduled activity, and even in that social circle, it was very hierarchical. It was almost a formal part of work life in how it was set up. And it was great in that it really helped build teams. Particularly for the young students, they could engage very quickly, which was fantastic. But there was no question that it really impacted the work-life balance because what we would routinely do is work together, then go out for dinner, and then come back to work again. And so our days were really long, which was fine for me because my wife and kids were sitting in the US when I was in Korea, but I felt bad for my colleagues and they all did this. Now, Switzerland is sort of different. What's interesting for me about Switzerland is people really separate work life from social life, even in a university setting. They're hugely separate. And now that's good because since people separate work life from social life, when they go to work, they're super efficient. My colleagues and even my graduate students, they come into work later than my students at Berkeley did, and they leave earlier than my students at Berkeley did. But their productivity is as good or better because they're not socializing, they're just working. And I think that's particularly important in a place like Switzerland, where the salaries are very high, so it's really important that people be efficient. And now the bad part of that is I do think, particularly in a sort of place with a diversity of people, new team members will often struggle to engage. And so it's really important to make sure, given this, that you find a way to bring new people in. And that's probably the most important thing we can do in these environments, is help new people engage. And I think it does require extra work to facilitate openness. And, looking at these three, I would say it's sort of my big picture lesson is every place has its unique advantages and disadvantages. And what we have to do as professionals is find what's good and bad about each one, work within the constraints, and then, particularly if you're moving to a new organization, bring in what you've experienced that's good and try to bring it into the system in a constructive way. It's not easy to do, but it's something we all have to try to do because we can all contribute to culture. I mean, culture is not something that's set. Culture develops continuously. So I'll end right there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was very insightful, clearly differentiating between these different cultures. And yeah, wonderful anecdotes too. Thank you so much, Vivek. Okay, so now that we're done with the presentation part, I think let's move on to the moderated Q&A part. So we've all heard from our panelists on what work culture means to them. They've clearly experienced a variety of cultures through their journey so far. And what we understand is a positive work culture clearly leads to success, and a negative work culture will be leading to failure. So could we deep dive a little bit more on this topic to drive this point home? So could you explain this to us? And if you have examples, that would be great too. So Alice, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think something that if you look on the internet, there's a lot of articles about the great resignation, which happened during the pandemic. And a lot of it is due to people finding like, hey, I don't have to take this toxic work culture anymore. So I think for a lot of companies are realizing that it's not just about like the pay or, you know, the those parts of the work that keeps people. So I would say attrition, retention is actually really, really important. And so having a positive work culture can make sure that you keep your best people, keep them happy, keep them engaged, keep them working at, you know, highest productivity, versus a toxic culture will drive people away. And I think that's what a lot of companies are seeing these past 2 years.
That makes sense. Carolina, do you have thoughts on this topic?
Oh, can't hear you.
I think you might be muted.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I think a positive work culture is one that always feel the employee more satisfied with their contribution to the company. And this satisfaction is what keeps also motivation to do more, to do better, to take more challenges. When I think of a negative work culture, then will be the opposite. I think for me, the worst is when companies kind of steal the confidence of an employee. And when they don't feel valued for the contribution, or they think that the contribution has zero impact on the team or on the company, and then that motivation is not there anymore. Yeah, for me, the work culture is actually very connected to the personality of the team members and also of the manager. So I think within my own organization, I can see different work cultures depending on the group. So actually, that's not something that is for granted, and it will evolve depending on who joins the team. So yeah, that's also difficult to sustain and give it for granted that it will stay good as well.
Makes sense. Thank you. Vivek, what do you think of this from an academia perspective?
I think it's pretty similar, but I mean the added thing is, you know, we expect our students and researchers to be really self-motivated and self-driven. And I mean that's true in a company, but that's, you know, arguably that's even more true in academia, just because we really want our students to be completely independent. They're not, in many cases, they're not working towards a common goal or research project. So given that, if you want our students and postdocs to be super motivated, if it's an environment where they don't feel rewarded, or they feel that there's, you know, they feel that there's sort of problems in the culture, that motivation disappears. And that affects their own work, but it'll also affect collaborations, it affects discovery. So, I mean, I do think that's really important. And frankly, I think that's a huge responsibility of the professors in that case, to sort of track that and sort of do their best to try to maintain, you know, to keep correcting, because it's just the nature of things. People coming and leaving, you have to sort of constantly correct.
Got it. Thank you. That was a very insightful discussion on this topic. Well, let's move on to a slightly different topic then. So Alice mentioned in her presentation to find out about the company or the team that you're going to join. So let's maybe figure out how. So from the point of someone who is going to join a company, what questions should I be asking them to find out about the company, and whom should I be asking this question? Maybe Carolina, you can go first on this one.
Yes. I think during an interview, you should definitely try to have the opportunity to talk not only to who will be your direct manager, but also to who will be your colleagues. And I think to try to figure out the way it works, maybe some questions that will come up, or I could think of it. Maybe ask about how the work gets divided, for example, with a project starts, when ideas need to be produced, who come up with that ideas. For example, if there's an architectural definition, how do they organize such exercises? How do the projects get follow up? How do they handle deadlines and difficult times and stressful times in the team? And what happens when a project gets delayed? how the company or the team handle those things. I think if you ask those things to both, you will realize first if there's a discrepancy on what the manager think and what the team says. I think that can be already a little bit of a red flag if your manager is not aligned with the team. And the other is you can see very well how people collaborate, because I think that makes a lot, yeah, it says a lot about what the culture is. So that would be maybe some ideas from my side.
Right. Thank you for the great suggestions. Vivek, what do you feel about it when someone is coming to join a research team in an academic setting? So whom should they be talking to?
I mean, I think it's the same as what Carolina said. You know, you'll hear one thing from the professors, but it's really important to talk to the fellow students and learn from what they do. You know, it's changed a little over the years. It used to be just based on how, you know, admissions happened at most universities. You wouldn't really have that opportunity. You'd be admitted, you'd pick a place, and you'd show up. But I think that's one of the good things that's changed in university settings now. A lot of universities, you have interviews. That's actually been one of the nice side effects of the pandemic is we at least get Zoom interviews, if nothing else. I think you can take advantage of that. And it's really important to talk to your peer network. I do think you learn more from your peer network than you do from talking to the managers or professors. And that's really important.
Makes sense. Alice, do you have anything to add to it?
Yeah, I think definitely ask questions like what was the last time, like what are the values that are important to you, for example, and then ask questions of the people. For example, if you think work-life balance is important values, like what do you guys do for fun? And if it sounds like they're working all the time, then you know that the culture is maybe not easy to have good work-life balance. Or maybe if you care about innovation, so what are the most innovative things that have come out of the lab? And you just listen, and if that to you sounds innovative, then it's like, oh, that's resonance there. So I do that when I interview people to join the team, because I want people joining the team to have similar core values. I'm like, oh, so what's the most innovative thing you've done? And then just listening and seeing if there's this resonance of culture between the two people.
That makes sense. Yeah, the company that I work with, we have a whole interview dedicated to this purpose, which is very useful. Right? Thank you so much. Okay, so once that goes well, and let's say I decided to join the company. After joining as a new employee, what are some steps that I can take to contribute positively to the company culture? Vivek, maybe.
I mean, I think one of the best things you can do is try to put yourself in other people's shoes. Think about how your actions and your way of working affect others, and then take advantage of your past experience. Right? I mean, all of us can learn from everybody else, and it's really beneficial. One of the really nice things about new people joining organizations is every time someone new joins an organization, it's an opportunity to get some new ideas and including things that will substantively impact company culture. And so hopefully any organizations that you're joining are open to that and are willing to listen. And that's part of the evaluation process that you're doing. And if so, you take advantage of that. And that'll tend to help.
Okay. Carolina, thoughts on this topic?
Yes, I think when you just join an organization, the right thing to do maybe at the beginning is to try to get integrated as soon as possible. And that includes, I think for me, some actions, maybe try to share your knowledge. You came from a different background, from a different organization. So sharing this knowledge is valuable for the new team. Taking initiative to help on ongoing projects is also helps you a bit to integrate quickly on what's going on in the team. Importantly, be open to cultural differences, and that comes from international environments. Yeah, my organization is quite international, so we have people from everywhere, and being open to those differences is very important. Also be reliable. I think I talk about this. You really need to make that your new colleagues can trust you. And I think then more easily they will let you into the activities without any delay. And also look for social interaction. I think, yeah, there's a lot of work, but if you indeed look for these moments of drinking a coffee, suggest going for a drink, or that someone shows you around in the city, I think that's where you get to know the people, not just your colleague, but also take into account this social, personal aspect of each one.
Thank you. Alice, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I agree. I think I really value new people coming into the company because they see everything from brand new eyes. And sometimes for those of us who've been in a company for, even a year, you just get used to all of the inefficiencies of the place. Oh yeah, doesn't work. You just get used to it. But someone coming in really value their perspective, and hopefully the company sees that. Of course, I think, like Caroline mentioned, you want to build up that trust and respect and valuable relationships first before you come in and be like, change this, change that. Like probably don't want to do that the day one. But I do think like usually we ask our new people like, what's something we can improve, and usually documentation. So it's like, well, jump in there, start, fixing things that could make it easier for the next person who's new. And then as you build those relationships with your manager, with your peers, you can bring in like, hey, like this could be improved, and then be part of the change agent and see yourself not as a victim, of the culture, but as somebody who can actually help to build it up.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. So I guess from a different point of view now, you're all leaders of the industry and academia. So what are some steps that you usually take so that when there is someone new, how do you help them get integrated into the team and make sure they help build a good working culture as well? Alice?
Yeah, so I think having a good onboarding process is really important. And if if you find that your company doesn't have one, then definitely that's somewhere that you can help. And part of it is, even before the person comes on, you want to check in with them, make sure they get their computer, their laptop, all the things that, because it would be horrible for the first 90 days to go by and the new employee just doesn't ramp up, doesn't feel included, and that to me is just a waste of a lot of effort to bring in new talent. So, some of the best practices of onboarding, like have a buddy, assign them another team member and sometimes the manager is just too busy to be like doing all those little things, and sometimes the employee would just be more comfortable going to a peer and then letting that peer have a little bit of like leadership, to usher new people in. So I think it's worth to spend the time just because hiring is so important, and getting someone in so that at the end of 90 days, they feel productive. They can actually see that they're helping the company. One other thing we do on our onboarding is at the end of 90 days, that new person does a little presentation, and everyone can see them and acknowledge them and encourage them, and see that they get to know them a little bit better. It's a little stressful, but I think it actually helps that new person to get integrated into the company.
Thank you. That sounds like a very useful tool. Vivek, as an advisor, does the process look similar when you welcome someone to your team, or do you do something else different?
No, I do something different, but I would honestly say I don't think I do a very good job of this. So here's what I do, and I think it works with some people and it doesn't work with others. And frankly, I think I learned from this session today about maybe better ways of doing it. But what I do is I have a certain luxury in my lab, since I don't worry about funding. We pretty much work on whatever we want. So students come in, and I don't assign them a project when they show up. They don't come in with a project. I have complete flexibility, and I give my students complete flexibility to propose a project. So my onboarding strategy is, because I don't assign them a project, I say your first job is go learn about what every other person in the lab is working on. Go have a deep conversation with them. And then you're not going to come back and propose a project to me. What you're going to come back and do is tell me, what did you like and dislike about each of their projects? And then we'll use that to try to triangulate together on a project that makes sense for you. That works great with some students. With others, it ends up not working well. So, you know, that's what I do, but I don't think it's the optimal way to do things. So.
That's a very interesting way to do it, though. I kind of really like that. Carolina, what about you?
I think when you think of senior people, and the best way they can contribute to integrate these new employees would be with knowledge sharing again. So I think sharing a bit of the history of the team, that's important, and also some of the specialized knowledge or pointing to tools of the specialized knowledge that needs to be learned for the new job. But something very important for me, when you are very knowledgeable and you have a great deal of experience and achievements in your career, an arrogant attitude is not helping with work culture, and it's not helping your team. Arrogance is also toxic. So I think it's important when senior people try to coach junior people, that they really leave, I call this arrogance aside, and take it and really help as more like a mentor. And I think you get quite some satisfaction when you try to help junior people to grow professionally and in your company, and the team will also benefit from it. So I think that's my take on this.
Divya, these are really great questions. Could we get to some of them in the Q&A?
Yes. All right. I think, yeah, we're close to end of the moderated session. So we will move on to the audience Q&A led by Shiwan. Take over. Thanks.
Thank you, Divya. And for the audience, if you have any question, please use Q&A section on your dashboard. Yeah, we do have a few questions coming in. And so as we know, the working environment has changed a lot in the past years. And do we foresee any major kind of working culture change in the future, especially after the pandemic, right? Some of the working environment has been changed, maybe even permanently. Will that impact the working culture? Maybe Alice, can you provide some comments?
Yeah, I think it's still, I would say it's still being worked on. I don't think people have really figured it out. For example, like a lot of us are trying to figure out hybrid. So there's fully remote, so people who are just fully at home all the time, and then there's fully in person. But now there's this whole new hybrid, which is like, do we bring some people back and do we fix it? And so I definitely think, at least from my experience, that that this pandemic has hurt productivity a little bit, and I think that's what companies are trying to figure out. What is the best way to provide flexibility to the employees, because it was, you know, working at home was very flexible for a lot of people, very challenging for some as well. But then do we bring them all back in person? We all have to deal with the commutes and the travel and all that. So I really think that we're still figuring it out, and how to really make it work and be fully productive pre-pandemic times with a hybrid and a work from anywhere type of format. So I think to me, it's still waiting to see what's the best way to do it.
That's right. That's right. That's super challenging. And for Vivek, do you have any comments from the academia side? Like, for example, for the research groups, how the pandemic changed the working culture inside the group?
I mean, I think it's been particularly hard in academia, and I think we're still learning about a lot of this, right? I mean, in research, it's very clear, you know, labs were shut down for a long time. Not so much in Switzerland, but, you know, in Berkeley, for example, I still have a couple of students there, and they couldn't go into the lab for a year. But I think it's been bad because, you know, you're taking younger people who are still learning to work with each other, and now you're asking them to not work with each other in person. It's not been great. I think collaboration has suffered. I think intellectual curiosity has suffered because we've gotten into this case of sort of passive learning where we stare at a screen and we think we're absorbing everything. And that's been bad. It's unquestionably true that we are seeing, if we look at academic data, we're seeing higher stress level in students in general. And it's unclear. I mean, I think it's not been good overall. It allows sort of remote interactions, which is a positive thing in some ways, but I think it also drives us to be a little passive, which then hurts collaboration, etc.
Yeah, sure. It seems we are still working on it. And the next question is, what are some example core values that can be very valuable in the industry? Maybe Carolina, do you have any comments?
Yeah, maybe coming back a little bit to things I explained before. For me, important core values are trust. That goes to any organization and goes to both sides, from manager to employee, employee to manager. Yeah, now with all this work culture respected after COVID, we can see indeed the freedom of this of the home working has also a big impact on the work-life balance. I think that has been great for people with kids, that they can balance better how they commute and when they commute, and yeah, especially if the kid is sick, or that has helped a lot, I think, to people with kids to balance that. But yeah, I think core values, there are many. It depends a bit on what is the purpose of the company. So for my organization, we are also doing research. So things like creativity is one of the core values, integrity also, and that comes also when Vivek also was mentioning this in academic work. Integrity in science is important. So yeah, it depends a bit on your company and what is the direction or the goal of this company.
Thank you, Carolina. And the next question is, how important to blend in, like or being yourself at work and academia? Maybe let's get started with Alice.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky thing because you don't you want to blend in, you want to feel like you belong, you want to feel included, and you don't want to rub people the wrong way. But at the same time, part of being successful is to be yourself and to bring your own branding, your own thoughts, your own diversity to wherever you're going. So it's important to, I think, to understand the culture, to understand the environment so that you know how to navigate it, but then at the same time, definitely be your original self. And that's something I feel takes time. You know, maybe when you're first starting out, you don't have a lot of confidence, or you're not sure, you don't even have a strong sense of your self, your original self. And it takes time to bring that out. And once you feel comfortable, you may bring it out more and more. So, I mean, even after so many years, I'm still trying to do that, you know, on a daily basis. So I think just, you know, don't get discouraged, and it's a work in progress, and it's a growth journey.
Thank you, Alice. And how about you, Vivek? From the academia field, do you have any extra comments?
I mean, so this is going to be my biases coming from Berkeley. You know, Berkeley, we say be weird, and I think, you know, I think that's great. I mean, I think in academia, it's generally more acceptable to not blend in, but there's the right balance, right? I mean, I think what you have to do is, it's great to not blend in, but make sure that your lack of blending in is not causing problems for others. So it's totally fine to be yourself, and you absolutely should. And in academia, it's great to be yourself, but then make sure that you're not hurting others in the process. And so you have to be sensitive to it.
Right. Thank you, Vivek. And the next question is, people in some cultures are not so transparent. And can you share some of your secrets to break through this barrier? Maybe Carolina, you want to address this?
That's a very difficult question. Actually, no, I don't have any tips for that. I would love to hear some myself. But indeed, I think that's one of the challenges of a multicultural environment. And not only this, but many other things that you will find as an obstacle. I think encouraging people maybe to be open and at least give them the feedback sometimes. Being open is okay. And try to see if they catch. I think if they see your team, the rest of the team members behaving in a different way than you do, that makes you think, okay, maybe I don't need to protect what I think, or and yeah, I think it's a learning. I think it's not easy, and it's not easy for the person that is in that situation. But yeah, I think giving feedback and trying to encourage people to really give their very honest opinion is the best.
Thank you, Carolina. And since Alice has also been working both in US and Asia, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I definitely think the culture. I mean, I think our upbringing, you know, the way we're taught by our parents, all play to how transparent we feel we can be at work, especially. I think as a leader, be the model, is most important. Like the team will be as transparent as you are, and other leaders, if they can be transparent all the way up to the CEO, I think really makes a difference to show, hey, this is a normal, or this is not something to be ashamed of. And so I think the leadership is very important, and it usually just take one person, so like if you're in a team and your manager's not into that, it's okay. Like if you are the first one, you'll be surprised to see how other people will kind of also want to share and be transparent. So there's not too many secrets. It's just it really takes one person, and to not give up. I think it might take a few times. It might take years in some cases for certain people to, and they might not want to either. So I think to not get discouraged, but for yourself to be comfortable to be transparent as you want to be.
Thank you, Alice. And another question we received is like how to choose between the technical side and the work culture side. So for instance, there are two companies. One is very top-notch the technical company, but the like working culture is maybe like a little bit stressed, right? Like how do you make the decision? Maybe Alice, you want to go ahead?
Oh, that's tough. That's tough. I think at least for me, it was like different seasons of my life. Like in the beginning, I was like, yeah, I want that challenge of, the big name and the long nights and and I could do that because you're young and you can your body can take some of that. And I remember being like, oh no, not another all-nighter, but when you're doing it in your 40s, it's way harder. so I think it's really a personal decision, and depending on what's going on in your personal life as to balance with your work life. But some people, they just enjoy that environment, just to be high stress, be like pushed, challenged all the time, or some people enjoy like the politics and they like that. So I think you really have to just think about yourself. What do you really want? And it's okay to not want that, because I think sometimes the culture is like, yeah, that's the place to be. You got to be in that high stress, and so just I think some self-reflection, and then you make the choice.
Thank you, Alice. And due to the time limitation, I think we have the last question. Like how can we understand the company's culture, help young professionals succeed professionally? Maybe Carolina, like how to understand the company culture can help us.
I think that's a very good question. I think understanding a company culture will really give you tools to know what they are expecting from you also when you grow in your career. Like something as simple as understanding how promotion works, because yeah, you are ambitious, you want to get promoted, but if you don't understand what are these company core values, what managers are expecting from you, what is a success, what does success mean in a certain company? It's not always the same. So indeed, in a company that is more on research and innovation, they will always look more at what are your creative results, what have you achieved, maybe how many patents or how many papers have you published. But in another company, no, that's not a measure of the success. Maybe if you are very structured, if you can meet all the deadlines, you can help your colleagues. I don't know. There are many aspects and many expectations. So I think knowing what the company is after will certainly help you to grow in that company. And that doesn't necessarily mean it will apply to another one, of course.
Thank you, Carolina. And for Vivek, maybe can you provide some comments from the research group point of view, like how to understand the research group's culture can help the PhD student succeed?
Yeah, I mean, as you're all aware, while the relationship with the advisor is important, the reality is the relationship with your peer network is far more important, because you don't, in a typical research group, you interact with your advisor less than you interact with your fellow graduate students and postdocs. So I think where the where the group culture makes a huge difference in research groups is when you join in your research groups, it helps you calibrate on how to interact with your peers, and how to engage in a constructive way, so that you can have the deep discussions that are critical to being a successful researcher. You learn what it's okay to say, how to say it in a way that it's constructive. And I think that's sort of the additional piece that's particularly important, because in an academic environment, the majority of interactions are not in the hierarchy, right? They're in the lateral directions.
Thank you, Vivek. I think that's all for the.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's all for the audience Q&A part.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you, Shiwan, and the audience for all the excellent questions. So time to wrap up. So on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to thank our wonderful panelists for all your insights, candid stories, personal anecdotes, and your perspectives on this very important topic of work culture. And your opinions will help our young professionals navigate culture and help them succeed. As noted earlier, the recording of this webinar will be available in the SSCES YouTube channel. And before you leave, don't forget to complete our feedback survey. And thank you all, and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone. Take care.